do you ever feel like your sprint retrospectives are just going through the motions? Discover how to inject new life into them on today's episode of the Agile Matrix podcast. Boost team morale and productivity with our guide to mastering sprint retrospectives. This is the Agile Matrix podcast with Tammy. Welcome to Agile Matrix podcast with Tammy, and I'm your host, your ever excited Tammy. And today we are focusing on one of the most important and most critical events in Scrum. Try and take a guess. 1, 2, 3. The sprint retrospective. So if you've ever felt like your retrospectives could be more effective or that your team isn't getting the most out of them, then this episode is for you. So like I always say, grab your drink, grab your pen, grab your paper, and let's dive right in. Optimizing your sprint retrospective. Stay tuned. So let's start at the beginning. What is a sprint retrospective? Well, let's baseline, right? So a sprint retrospective is a Scrum event held at the end of a sprint, right? Where the team gathers together to reflect on the recent sprint and identify ways to improve for the sake of future sprints. The sprint retrospective serves as an opportunity for the team to inspect and adapt the sprint. So in that retrospective event, they discuss what went well, what didn't go as planned, and what actions can be taken to enhance performance and processes moving forward, right? So it is an opportunity for the team to inspect their ways of working and adapt it for the next sprint. Now, this retrospective is one of the ways that the team continuously improves. In fact, the team actively looks for an improvement to take into the next sprint, so that if you compare sprint by sprint, the team should be trending in the right direction in their improvements, upward and forward, right? So it is very important to note that this sprint retrospective must be done with the recent sprint as the singular backdrop. That's why it's called the sprint retrospective, not sprints retrospective, not a retrospective, but the sprint retrospective, the retrospective of the sprint that is just about to conclude. Okay, so let's get that clear. So now that we talk about what a retrospective or what a sprint retrospective is, let's look at what are the objectives of a sprint retrospective. So number one objective, we're looking at reflection. What do I mean? So here the team examines the past sprint to understand successes and challenges. So reflection, first objective. The second one is continuous improvement. The team together identifies ways or areas for improvement, and they establish actionable steps to enhance future sprints, right? That's number two. And number three, team cohesion. How? The team together, they foster a collaborative environment where team members can openly share their thoughts, their opinions, and their suggestions. So it creates an opportunity for team cohesion to continue happening. Then the fourth one, process optimization. You see, at the retrospective, throughout the sprint, the team inspect and adapt process and product. And during the retrospective, we focused totally on process. So during the retrospective, we look at ways to improve the process, thereby optimizing the process. So we evaluate and refine processes to increase their efficiency and effectiveness, right? And then finally, action planning. So here we develop a concrete plan for implementing the improvements in the upcoming sprints. Like what we said what the Scrum Guide says, inspection without adaptation is a waste. So we inspect, we come up with opportunities and ideas and thoughts for how to improve, and then we implement them. So we adapt. Okay? So now these are the objectives of a typical sprint retrospective. Now let's look at the structure of a typical sprint retrospective. So first part of the retrospective is first part. And this is for the Scrum Masters that are listening and even team members, so that you can observe what's going on. So first we set the stage. And that's why Scrum Masters will begin a lot of times usually with a warm-up or an icebreaker to engage the team, right? And then very importantly, we establish the meeting's purpose and goals, so that we know that this event is to look at the last sprint, come up with ideas for improvements to see what worked well, what didn't work so well, and what we can do to improve it next time, right? So then number two, we gather the data. We review the sprint's achievements, its challenges, and most importantly, focusing around the sprint goal. So what are we saying? When we're looking at the sprint, we are actually asking ourselves, did they achieve the sprint goal? we're also then using that backlog to pull improvements out. So if we didn't achieve the sprint goal, we're looking at what stopped us. We're looking at what we can do for the next sprint to ensure that we get better. So we gather data, we collect feedback on what went well, what didn't, and any obstacles that we encountered that stopped us from achieving our objective, or any obstacles we overcame that ensure we hit our objective, right? Then also we generate insights. What do? We analyze the data that we've collected. We analyze them into patterns, right? We identify the patterns, we identify the root causes, and then we also identify potential areas for improvement. And then, very important, we encourage open and honest discussion. Then, number four, we decide on actions. So, we've gathered insights. Now, we have to, number one, we prioritize the identified improvement opportunities. Then, we create specific actionable items and we plan for them for the next sprint. And we actually discuss among ourselves who's going to do what, right? And then finally, we close retrospective. We summarize the key takeaways and the agreed actions. And of course, as a facilitator that you are, as a Scrum Master, you also thank the team for being open and honest, and you thank them for their participation and their input. Why? Because without their input, the retrospective will be dead. Remember, as a Scrum Master, your job, your accountability regarding the sprint retrospective is to ensure that it holds, it keeps this time box, and it is effective. So you're going to thank them for making it effective because they have to participate. And then finally, you also reflect on the retrospective process itself. And then you see with the team, is there anything that we did in this retro that we need to improve? So that the next retrospective is better. You see, we're always looking for something to improve. Okay, so now let's look at something that we normally talk about. Now, in the process of gathering data, a lot of times we use things like what went well, what didn't go so well. We talk about the team offer suggestions, right? What went well, what didn't go so well. But there's something I've observed in my experience as a Scrum Master and Agile coach. That process is what I've defined for myself as a subjective retrospective. What do I mean? It all depends on how the team feel about what went well, what didn't go so well. So I'll give an example. You have a team member that talk about the sprint really going well, and left to him, the sprint was fantastic. And then when you dig into it, you find out maybe the team member had 8 days of a 2 week sprint, which is 10 working days. So he had 8 days where things were just upside down. They didn't work. And then the last 2 days, finally, the code worked. It passed the test. It was deployed and it's working. So you ask that guy and he says, yeah, the sprint was fantastic. Why? Because what we went to achieve eventually worked, right? Then you have the flip case where for 8 days of a 2 week sprint, everything was working okay. And for some reason, maybe the person's keyboard stopped working, typed in the wrong exclamation point or the wrong sign, and the code isn't working anymore. And up until the retro, it wasn't working or it didn't get to work. So for that person, the sprint didn't work well. Now, are their feelings wrong? No, they're correct. But what I always try to ensure that I do is I call it the objective retrospective and the subjective retrospective. Subjective, get what the team feel about the sprint just ended. What went well, what didn't go so well. That's good. Gather that. But then we also have the objective retrospective. And what do I mean? You look at the data. I use flow metrics a lot. So you look at things like cycle time. So for me, particularly, I'll use the cycle time scatter plot. And what will I look at? I look at the outliers. Because objective retrospective, what it does, it paints a mirror. The subjective retrospective, it depends on my interpretation of what happened. Like I said about the guy that had 8 days where he worked well and 2 days that he didn't work well. It is his interpretation of what didn't go well that he will say, oh yeah, this was a bad retro or bad sprint. And his interpretation of what went well that will say this was a good sprint. But numbers don't lie. So we look at the objective retrospective, we look at the data. So in the example I cited before, we look at the cycle time scatter plot and I'll identify outliers. So for example, I'll look at this story that maybe of all the stories were completed in this region on the scatter plot. And then I look at that story that's up there on the scatter plot and I go, okay, that story was out of place. Let's discuss why it took us that long to finish that particular story, right? And then we'll come up with an analysis. Then we'll come up with actions to prevent it from happening again. It might be stuff like we're dependent on someone to sign it off, and the person didn't respond on time. Then we come up with actions to prevent that from happening again. Stuff like that. Then I look at the outlier on the other side, which is the story that was the quickest for us to finish. And I go, aha, what intel can we draw from this? Why, how can we finish this story so quickly? Then we come up with actions or we come up with analysis and then we say, okay, so what can we onboard in what we did in that time to make it standard practice? So you see, that way I'm able to gather from the data actions for us to then implement to keep on improving. Because, like I spoke with someone the other day, and he said something was the podcast I had with Luis Felipe, and he said something that if you singularly focus on the team being happy, here's one interesting thing: are you aware that if you paid your team and they didn't do any work, and you said there was no need for them to do any work, they would still be happy? So what does that mean? The team being happy isn't enough to go, things are going well. You could be happy for so many different reasons. I could get a promotion. I could have bought, maybe I got a new car free of charge. There could be so many things that could make me happy during the retrospective that don't necessarily concern work, but they will influence work. And there could be so many things that could make me unhappy. I could have maybe, on the way to work, someone could have had an accident. And that day, it was an average day, but that accident just tanked the day. So basically, the subjection, the immediacy bias, the fact that we're human beings could influence the subjective retrospective. So that's why I usually try to juxtapose to balance the subjective with the objective, so that way we are sure we're looking at the same thing the same way and also the right way. Remember, metrics are like a mirror. They tell you exactly who you are, okay? Exactly how you look, and then you can make adjustments, right? So that's my top tip of the day. So now let's look at some of the common pitfalls and then some of the solutions that you can actually apply to them in your retrospective. So I don't know if you ever had the situation where in your retrospective you have a few members that are outspoken and these guys can dominate the discussion. And when this happens, it can stifle contribution from the quieter members of the team and lead to a lack of diverse perspectives. I'm sure you've seen that before. I've had it before. So let me give you 2 tips you can actually do to ensure that this doesn't happen anymore. Number 1 tip: you use anonymous feedback techniques. You use tools. You can use surveys or stickies. Our friends, the sticky notes. You can use that. What does that do? It takes the really loud person and forces him or her to be loud only on the posting, giving everybody an equal opportunity to put their thoughts down, right? So that then reduces the influence of that really loud person or people in the room, because all they can do is put stickies. Now they may actually have multiple stickies. That's fine. They're putting their thoughts together. Eventually, through the process, you're able to ensure that everybody has an equal say or has an opportunity for an equal say. So that's one technique. Number 2, you can use round robin format, right? So here, each member gets an equal chance to speak. You can, like some people have done it before where they time and say, okay, we have a couple of comments, everybody has 10 seconds and they do that. So what that does is it balances the playing field. Everyone is equally presented with the opportunity. Now, it does not mean the quieter person will speak. It just means they've been given an equal chance to speak. When it comes to the issue of you have someone that's constantly quiet, that's where the Scrum Master has to do the coaching. So you find out from the person on a one-on-one basis why he or she isn't really contributing to the retrospective. So I'm not saying that this will solve all the problems, but it helps mitigate the impact of the situation that you face. So that's number 1. Number 2, we look at a situation where there are lots of discussions, but no concrete actions. So the retrospective goes from being a sprint retrospective being a moaning session, right? And what you observe when people have that is that a lot of issues keep happening every single sprint because nobody actually ever puts down actions and then also follows up on the actions being executed, right? So first thing you do is ensure that every retrospective you end with a list of specific measurable action items, right? And ensure that each action item has a clear definition of what good looks like, a certain timeline, and maybe potentially even an action owner. So who's going to work on this? Who's going to do this? What do we expect to happen at the end of this? What will good look like when this is done? And like I always tell people, ensure that when you start the next sprint, those actions that you've selected, maybe two or three of them. So obviously you would dot vote, you would vote on the highest potential and all that, you vote on them. You bring them into the sprint and put them in the sprint backlog and then discuss them as you progress them through the board at every daily scrum. Two things that does. Number one, it demonstrates to the team the fact that you take the suggestions seriously. And then number two, most importantly, it tells the team, keep bringing your suggestions. Keep bringing your suggestions, keep bringing your ideas so we can improve as a team. It shows them those two very important things, right? Then that's one I said. Number one, have a group of action items. Number two, ensure that they are smart. You know what the SMART goals are? The specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So you use that to frame the action items. So this makes them clear and trackable. And then number three, follow up. Review the previous sprint's actions. Now, a lot of people miss out this very important point. When you start the sprint retrospective, look at the previous actions you decided in the previous retrospective and then review them to go, did we finish them? Did we achieve the purpose? Did it change the mix? Did good in those actions produce good in the Scrum team? Right? So when you connect those two together, people understand that as a Scrum Master, you take these suggestions seriously and the team understand that these are important actions. And most beautiful is when the actions improve the way they work. Okay, so that's what I say. So follow up, right? Then let's look at another pitfall. So imagine a situation where at the retrospective becomes it has a negative environment and it becomes the blame game. Team members blame themselves for different things. Yeah, if you had done this, we wouldn't have had that problem. And if you didn't do this, we'll have been better we're better than we are right now. So it's your fault. No, it's not my fault. It's your fault. What do you do in that kind of situation, right? So what do I always say? Now, when you have that kind of situation, it creates a negative environment, one, and that negative environment discourages open and honest communication. And in your Scrum team, you always want to have open and honest communication. Remember the Scrum values. Think about openness. Think about courage, right? So you want these to always be there. So now, remember what we call the prime directive. This was put together by Norm Kurth. And let me just read it out to you very clearly here. It says, regardless of what we discover, right, we must understand and truly believe that everyone did the best job they could, given what they knew at the time, their skills and abilities, the resources available, and the situation at hand. What are we saying? We must believe, like Matthias Ogler said, we must assume positive intent. We must believe that what we did with the best one that we had at that time, with the best intentions at hand. So that must pervade every part of the communication. But as a Scrum Master, let me tell you what you can do to ensure that this doesn't continue. Number one, positive focus. What do we say here? Start with positive feedback by discussing what went well before you move on to the challenges. That's what you observe when people quote the retrospective. They say what went well, what didn't go so well. So start with what went well. That encourages the team to go, well, we're not that bad. We got this right. And, it gets them talking. Then you can go to what challenges they had. And also, even the framing of the communication. Like you notice I said, what went well and what didn't go so well. I didn't say what went well and what failed, or what we messed up at, or what we didn't do well. I said what didn't go so well, right? So the framing as well. And then also as a Scrum Master, you encourage a blame-free environment. How? You encourage the culture where the focus is on the processes and systems rather than individuals. And how do you do that? Your language. So you use language that emphasizes collective responsibility. E.g., when you look at something, you say, so what can we do about this? Can you see that? How can we improve this process? That's different from who made the mistake. Can you see? So in your communication, you make it always a we as a team. What can we do? Right? So that's very important. Then also, as the person facilitating the event, you should be quick to intervene when you see it going into a personal attack situation, where it's going to, it should have done that, should have done that. No, you pull it back and go, so what are we going to do about it? Right? So always steer it back to constructive and solution-focused dialogue. those are my tips. So that is it for optimizing your sprint retrospective. Now, getting the sprint retrospective right is crucial because it directly influences the team's ability to learn from past experiences. It fosters continuous improvement and enhances overall productivity and morale, ultimately driving the success of future sprints. Remember, you want your teams to keep on improving progressively. And every sprint is an experiment on the ways of working. So when you come together, you look at the results of your experiment and you add more or you take away, but you do something to continuously improve the team. It's all an experiment. Do not be deceived by the standing look of the product backlog. All we are doing is trying to solve problems of product and process. So that's why the sprint retrospective is very, very important, right? So, thank you for joining me in this episode of the Agile Matrix podcast. I hope you found this discussion on optimizing your sprint retrospectives both insightful and practical. Remember, the sprint retrospective is a key driver to continuous improvement and team cohesion. And by taking time to get these retrospectives right, you are doing a smart thing. You empower your teams to learn, to adapt, and grow, ensuring that each sprint builds on the last. So don't forget to tune in to the Agile Matrix podcast for more episodes packed with tips, with insights and expert advice, and also fantastic conversations with experts and leaders in our field. And these are all geared to help you and your team excel in your Agile journey. So if you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, leave a review, share your thoughts and experiences with us, either via the podcast app you're listening to, on social media, or on YouTube. Thank you very much. Stay agile and see you the next time on the Agile Matrix podcast. Cheers, everyone, and have a fantastic day.